The day started like any other, a quiet morning in my neighborhood where everything seemed normal on the surface. I had lived in this community for years, and despite my position as the police chief, I had always preferred to keep a low profile. My presence in the neighborhood wasn't about authority. It was about being part of the community, about having a place where I could just be a person and not the badge. But not everyone saw me that way. For some, I was just a black man, an outsider in a place they believed belonged to them. It wasn't long before I noticed a troubling pattern. My packages had been going missing, little by little. At first, I chalked it up to delivery mistakes, but as the days passed, it became clear that something else was going on. I decided to install a security system around my home, not just because of my missing deliveries, but because something told me this wasn't just about stolen packages. It was about power. Someone in the neighborhood wanted to remind me that I didn't belong. Then, one morning, my suspicions were confirmed. The cameras caught my neighbor, Karen, casually walking up to my porch, lifting one of my packages as if it were hers, and strolling back to her house like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched the footage, feeling a slow burn of anger rise in my chest. This wasn't just theft. It was entitlement, the kind that assumed there would be no consequences. I wasn't about to let this slide, not because of the package itself, but because of what it represented. This was about respect, about fairness, about the principle that no one, no matter their background, no matter their privilege, was above the law. As I stepped outside to confront her, I kept my emotions in check. I had seen power plays like this before, and I knew exactly how this was going to unfold. What Karen didn't know was that she had just stolen from the last person she should have crossed. I stepped onto my porch, my eyes locking onto Karen as she stood in her driveway, completely unaware that I had seen everything. The stolen package sat in her hands, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, as if she had gotten away with something. She was confident, maybe even amused, and for a moment, I wondered how many times she had done this before. How many other neighbors she had taken advantage of. How many times she had assumed there would be no consequences. I walked toward her, my voice steady but firm. "Karen, I believe you have something that belongs to me." She turned, feigning surprise, as if she had no idea what I was talking about. "Oh, this?" she said, holding up my package as if she were just now noticing it. "I thought it was delivered to the wrong house." I studied her expression, the casual indifference, the complete lack of guilt. "The cameras tell a different story," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket and playing the footage. There she was, clear as day, strolling up my steps and swiping the package without hesitation. Karen's smirk wavered, but she quickly composed herself, crossing her arms in defiance. "You don't have to make such a big deal out of it," she scoffed. "It's just a package." I took a step closer, keeping my voice controlled. "No, Karen, it's about more than that. It's about respect. It's about knowing right from wrong. And it's about the fact that you thought you could take something that wasn't yours and face no consequences." Her face hardened, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to admit what she had done. Instead, she was going to do what people like her always did when caught in a corner. She was going to play the victim. And sure enough, her hand shot to her phone, her fingers already dialing. "You're threatening me," she said, her voice rising. "I'm calling the police." I folded my arms, waiting. This was about to take a turn she never saw coming. Karen's fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, her voice shaking with forced distress. "Hello? Yes, I'm being harassed," she said, casting glances at me between words, as if hoping I would back down. "He's threatening me. I don't feel safe." I exhaled slowly, watching the performance unfold. It was almost fascinating how quickly she had flipped the narrative. One moment, she was a thief caught red-handed, and the next, she was a helpless woman in danger. It was a script I had seen before, one that had played out far too many times in history, always at the expense of men like me. I remained still, calm, letting her dig her own grave. I knew exactly how this was going to end, and unlike her, I had no fear. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights painted the street. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions professional but alert. Karen rushed toward them, her voice dripping with urgency. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. He came onto my property. He tried to take something from me. I don't even know what he's capable of." The officers turned their attention to me, their faces unreadable. I took a slow step forward, my voice steady. "Gentlemen," I greeted them, reaching into my pocket. Karen's breath hitched, but instead of pulling out a weapon, I retrieved my badge. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The officers straightened, recognition flashing across their faces. "Chief?" one of them said, blinking in surprise. Karen's mouth fell open slightly. Her confidence wavered. "Yes," I said, locking eyes with her. "I am the chief of police." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Karen's carefully crafted web of lies had unraveled before her eyes. I watched as her face turned a deep shade of red, her breath quickening. For the first time, she realized that she had picked the wrong person to frame. Karen stood frozen, the weight of her mistake finally pressing down on her. The smug confidence she had moments ago was now replaced with sheer panic. She had called the police expecting them to come to her rescue, to paint me as the aggressor, to uphold the unspoken rules that had worked in her favor for so long. But now, reality had caught up with her. One of the officers, a man I had worked with on multiple cases, turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, can you explain exactly what happened?" His voice was firm but professional, giving her just enough rope to either explain herself or tighten the noose around her own credibility. Karen swallowed hard, glancing between me and the officers. He was taking something off my porch," she stammered. "I thought he was stealing it." I folded my arms, allowing the silence to stretch. Let her try to spin this into something believable. The second officer sighed, looking down at the box in my hands. "Chief, is this yours?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "It is," I confirmed, pulling up my phone, "and I have the footage to prove it." I tapped the screen, and within seconds, the officers were watching the moment Karen had stepped onto my property, snatched my package, and sauntered off without a care in the world. The evidence was clear. There was no misunderstanding, no innocent mistake, just entitlement in its rawest form. The first officer turned back to her, his patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, do you realize what you've done? Not only did you steal from him, but you also filed a false police report." Karen's face twisted in desperation. I didn't mean—" "Save it," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Actions have consequences, Karen, and for once, you don't get to rewrite the story." The officers exchanged glances. One reached for his radio. Karen's reign of unchecked privilege had finally come to an end. The weight of the moment settled in as the officers turned their attention back to Karen. Gone was her smug arrogance, replaced by a frantic desperation that barely concealed the realization that she had lost control. She had expected the police to rush in, to believe her without question, to see me, the black man, as the threat. But now, with undeniable evidence in their hands and her false report exposed, the reality was sinking in. One officer sighed, rubbing his temple as if he had seen this scenario play out too many times before. "Ma'am, do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" he asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone exhausted by the same old story. "Not only did you steal from your neighbor, but you also attempted to weaponize law enforcement against him with a false accusation." Karen shook her head frantically, her hands trembling. I just made a mistake," she sputtered, her voice losing the confidence it held earlier. I took a slow breath, keeping my posture relaxed but firm. I had seen this before. The moment when someone who has relied on their privilege suddenly finds themselves accountable. The moment when they realize that the system they expected to protect them is no longer on their side. The second officer folded his arms, glancing at me. "Chief, what do you want to do about this?" he asked, his voice neutral. I studied Karen for a long moment. She was crumbling under the weight of exposure, her usual control slipping through her fingers like sand. This wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure she understood that actions have consequences. I turned to the officers and nodded. "File the report," I said simply. "She needs to answer for this." Karen's mouth fell open, her face draining of color. For once, she wasn't the one in control, and for the first time in her life, she was finally facing the consequences of her choices. The weight of justice is not always swift, but when it arrives, it is undeniable. As the officers began drafting their report, Karen stood frozen, her earlier arrogance shattered. The privilege she had wielded so carelessly, expecting it to shield her from consequences, was now crumbling beneath the weight of the truth. I watched her closely, not out of satisfaction, but out of curiosity. Would she take responsibility? Would she realize that this wasn't just about a stolen package, but about the deeper implications of her actions? The way she had used the system as a weapon, the way she had assumed her words would carry more weight than mine, the way she had tried to turn me into a criminal in my own home. The officers worked methodically, recording her statement, reviewing the footage once more, and confirming the details with me. It was clear from their expressions that they had no patience for what had just unfolded. False accusations were not just an inconvenience, they were dangerous. I had spent years enforcing the law, ensuring justice was served fairly, and I had seen firsthand how a false call like this could have ended differently for someone without my title, my reputation, or the undeniable evidence I had gathered. Karen's hands shook as she attempted to defend herself, but the words that once carried authority in her world now fell flat. I misread the situation," she stammered. "I thought—" "No, you didn't," I interrupted, my voice calm but unwavering. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Silence settled between us, heavy with unspoken truths. The officers exchanged a glance before turning back to her. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a crime," one of them said. "You'll be hearing from us soon." Karen's face paled, the reality setting in. For the first time, she was the one held accountable, and there was no escape. As the officers wrapped up their report, Karen stood frozen, her face a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. The power she once thought she held over me had crumbled in an instant, leaving her exposed. For so long, she had operated under the assumption that her word would be enough, that a mere accusation could shape reality. But now, confronted with undeniable proof and officers who refused to bend to her narrative, she found herself in a position she had never imagined, accountable. I took a slow breath, steadying the emotions that simmered beneath my calm exterior. This wasn't just about a stolen package. It was about a pattern, a system, a mindset that allowed people like Karen to believe they could manipulate the truth without consequence. How many times had situations like this ended differently for others? How many times had someone without my title, without my connections, been painted as the villain simply because someone like Karen had decided they were? Karen finally spoke, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she muttered, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. I thought—" "You thought your lie would be enough," I said evenly. "You thought calling the police would get you out of this. But it didn't." The officers exchanged looks, their patience clearly thinning. "Ma'am, you need to understand the gravity of what you've done," one of them said, his voice firm. "False police reports waste valuable resources. They put real people in danger. This isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a serious offense." Karen swallowed hard, her shoulders slumping as reality set in. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the narrative. She wasn't the victim, the authority, the one calling the shots. She was just another person facing the consequences of her own actions. And no privilege could save her now. As the weight of her actions settled in, Karen's confidence wavered, her once defiant stance shrinking under the pressure of undeniable truth. Her eyes darted between the officers and me, looking for an escape that no longer existed. The realization was hitting her all at once. This wasn't a game she could manipulate, nor was it a scenario where her privilege would shield her from accountability. She had crossed a line, and now she was standing in the aftermath of her own making. I remained calm, though a storm of emotions brewed beneath the surface. This wasn't the first time I had seen someone like Karen attempt to weaponize the system, to use it as a shield for their own wrongdoing. But today, that weapon had backfired. She had expected the police to arrive and unquestioningly side with her, but instead, she was the one under scrutiny. For years, people like her had relied on assumptions, on ingrained biases that tilted the scales in their favor. But the world was changing, and this moment was proof. One of the officers, an older man with a steady gaze, sighed as he closed his notepad. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had seen far too much of this, "you need to understand something. Calling the police on an innocent person? That's not just a mistake. It's dangerous. It's reckless. And frankly, it's unacceptable." Karen swallowed hard, her lips pressing into a tight line. She had no more excuses, no more room to twist the truth. The weight of accountability was settling onto her shoulders, and for the first time, she seemed to feel it. I met her gaze, holding it for a moment longer before speaking. "The next time you think about using law enforcement as your personal tool, remember this moment. Because next time, you might not just be facing embarrassment, you might be facing real consequences." She had lost this battle, but the lesson she had learned would follow her far beyond today. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick with unspoken truths and shattered illusions. Karen, once brimming with arrogance, now stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade of victimhood crumbling under the weight of reality. The officers, having reviewed the undeniable footage of her theft, no longer saw her as the concerned citizen she had painted herself to be, but as the manipulator she truly was. For years, people like Karen had relied on a system designed to work in their favor, a world where their words held more weight than evidence, where a single accusation could ruin a life without question. But today was different. Today, she had encountered someone who not only refused to be silenced, but who carried the authority she had underestimated. The irony was almost poetic. She had called the police expecting protection, only to find herself standing before them as the one under scrutiny. I took a slow breath, maintaining my composure despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let someone like Karen reduce me to a mere stereotype. This was more than a stolen package. It was about dignity, respect, and the dangerous game she had played. A game that had been used against people who looked like me for far too long. "Karen," I said, my voice steady but firm, "this wasn't just about a package, was it? You thought you could take what wasn't yours, and when you got caught, you tried to flip the script. But the difference between you and me is that I don't need to lie to make a point." Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. She had lost the upper hand, and she knew it. The officers exchanged glances before turning back to her. "Ma'am, we need you to understand that this is serious. False accusations waste time and resources, and quite frankly, they're dangerous," one of them said. Karen's shoulders slumped, her bravado gone. For the first time, she was being held accountable, not just for her actions, but for the privilege she had long abused. And for the first time, she had no escape. In the aftermath of my confrontation with Karen, a powerful lesson emerged, one that resonated deeply within our community and went far beyond a dispute over missing packages. As days passed, I noticed subtle changes throughout our neighborhood. It wasn't just Karen who had learned something valuable. The entire community seemed to absorb a deeper truth from the incident. Neighbors who previously remained silent began approaching me, offering words of support, sharing their own experiences of subtle prejudice and unspoken tension. Suddenly, conversations about race, privilege, and the importance of accountability became the norm rather than the exception. Karen, who had once thrived on intimidation and privilege, found herself isolated. Her grip over our community loosened, her credibility diminished. Yet, in seeing her isolation, I felt no sense of vindictive triumph. Instead, it became clear to me that the real victory wasn't in proving Karen wrong. It was in uniting my community in a shared commitment to fairness and respect. More than once, I thought about how easy it would have been to simply ignore her behavior or quietly move away, avoiding conflict altogether. But confronting Karen, challenging her prejudice openly and unapologetically, provided a powerful example that inspired others to stand tall, speak their truths, and refuse to be silenced by fear or intimidation. Neighbors who had previously been hesitant to speak up discovered their own voices, drawing strength from my experience. They began to organize meetings, events, and dialogues about inclusion and respect. The entire neighborhood felt revitalized, not by fear or compliance, but by courage and mutual understanding. Reflecting on it now, I realize how critical it is to stand firmly against injustice, no matter how minor it may seem. Silence is often mistaken for acceptance, but speaking up sparks meaningful change. While Karen might never fully acknowledge the depth of her mistakes, the broader community learned a lesson about dignity, courage, and collective responsibility. Today, I walk down my street with pride, aware of the transformation we've experienced together. The journey wasn't easy, but it was essential. I remain committed to ensuring our community stays inclusive, respectful, and united, standing tall in the knowledge that one voice, determined and clear, can indeed change the world around it. In reflecting on the journey we've explored today, several powerful lessons emerge that resonate deeply with anyone who has ever stood up against injustice. The story reminds us that the true measure of courage lies not in avoiding conflict, but in confronting it with unwavering dignity. We witness a pivotal moment where a single individual's determination transformed a seemingly small neighborhood dispute into a catalyst for broader change, a testament to the power of integrity and steadfast commitment to one's principles. At its heart, this narrative teaches us that respect is not something granted by authority or earned through conformity, but rather something that must be actively cultivated and maintained by every member of our community. When individuals allow prejudice and unfounded assumptions to dictate interactions, the very foundation of our shared society begins to crumble. Instead, when we choose to challenge such behavior, we not only reclaim our dignity, but also inspire others to speak out and embrace a culture of mutual respect. The transformation seen in the community, from silence to open dialogue, illustrates how each of us has the power to redefine our surroundings. It shows that even in the face of adversity, standing up for what is right can pave the way for a more inclusive and just society. Whether it's a neighborhood conflict or systemic issues at a larger scale, our actions matter. They serve as a reminder that every act of defiance against discrimination contributes to a collective momentum toward meaningful change. Moreover, this story emphasizes that change often begins at the most personal level. It challenges us to look within ourselves, to recognize our own biases, and to commit to fostering environments where every voice is valued. By choosing to confront injustice, we build bridges rather than walls, creating spaces where people of all backgrounds can coexist with dignity. As we conclude this exploration, let us carry forward the resolve to stand up for fairness and equality in every corner of our lives. The courage to challenge prejudice, whether in our neighborhoods, workplaces, or beyond, is what truly transforms communities and empowers individuals. If you believe in the power of unity, respect, and relentless pursuit of justice, please join us on this journey. Subscribe to our channel Civil Rights Fight to stay inspired and informed as we continue to share stories that ignite change and uplift voices in the fight for civil rights.